Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today's video is going to be something a little different. I consume a lot of content. Shows, anime, games, movies. There's always something playing in the background while I work, because I really just love a good story, and there are a lot of them out there. And in consuming all that content, I've come across a lot of narratives and characters alike that send really strong, poignant messages about art and artists in particular. And I've always wanted to analyze those messages and the wider issues that they're portraying and addressing, so I'm going to. Today will be the first in an ongoing video series called ARTFUL Analysis, in which I discuss the ways in which individual characters, narratives, and themes in popular media represent real issues and struggles that artists face. Starting off with the show that I love dearly for a multitude of reasons, Bojack Horseman. Bojack Horseman is a piece of art in and of itself. It's an animated series that manages to beautifully and tragically depict the ugly, painful process of dealing with mental illness and addiction, the duality of human nature, and the fact that every human being can be both good and bad and somewhere in between, regardless of their actions or the motivations behind them. It's a show I would recommend to anyone, because above all else, it's real. It's authentic. Watching it, you'll find yourself connecting and empathizing with characters that you once hated, feeling repulsed by and disappointed in characters you once loved, and identifying with the very real, very diverse struggles each of them face in their lives and relationships with each other. I could talk about Bojack Horseman as a show altogether for a long time, and I have several other artful analysis videos planned about several of its characters and themes. But this one is about one character in particular, and how her struggle throughout her career as a writer is one that many artists share. Diane, ghostwriter, celebrity tweeter, journalist, and young adult fiction author, who despite her many successes and experiences, never got to write the one book she really wanted to. But before we look at Diane's story and the wider-reaching issues that it represents, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. If you somehow don't know, in the year 2023, Skillshare is the largest and, in my opinion, best online learning community, with classes on pretty much everything: illustration, graphic design, marketing, coding, editing, music production. There's really no end to what you can learn there. It's where I learned pretty much everything I needed for my career long before I had the opportunity to start working with them, from video editing to webcomic creation to new illustration techniques. And that's because Skillshare truly does offer everything you could possibly need to make the dream of a creative career a reality. Lately, I've been struggling a lot with my art style, experimenting with a lot of new techniques, but not really being sure what direction I actually want to commit to. And once again, Skillshare has come to my rescue with a course by Andy J. Pizza, Find Your Style, 5 exercises to unlock your creative identity. It was incredibly insightful, and the exercises that it walked me through were essential in helping me come to a much clearer understanding of my work and how I want it to be. There are so many things I want to learn how to do or learn how to do better, and whenever I have time to make that happen, I do it on Skillshare, because I know without even needing to look that they'll have a class on it. With everything from carefully curated collections on how to jumpstart a creative career to individual classes on how to embroider a cool dragon onto the back of that new jacket you just thrifted, there is legitimately something for everyone. But you can find that out for yourselves by trying it out today. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, and I can't recommend enough that you go click it now, because there is a class for absolutely anyone, including you. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Please go check them out, and now let's get into the video. Diane has always been a character I resonated with, ever since I first started watching the series when it premiered. After living through an incredibly difficult childhood and devoting her life to turning the pain she survived into something meaningful with her writing, she's constantly fighting to be the best version of herself that she can be, even when that ends up meaning holding herself and those around her to impossible standards, and kicking herself for failing to meet self-imposed expectations that were never achievable in the first place. She's someone who has a strong view on how she wants her life and the world around her to be, and while that can be positive and drive her to work hard to meet those standards, it can also lead to her being let down and crushed by disappointment when time and time again, neither she nor the world is as good as she believes they should be. Her character arc is so unbelievably well written, and especially on my second watch of the show, it's so striking to see how much she grows throughout the duration of the story. But we're not talking about that as a whole today, because while her growth as an individual is a topic worthy of its own video, it's the growth of her career as a writer that's relevant to me and probably many of you as artists. Over the course of the show, Diane, like many artists, is faced with a constant, unending struggle between creating the work that matters to her and the work that she knows people will read. It's something all of us pursuing creative careers know too well. If you want to make a living at art in any form, you want that because art is something that brings you so much joy to create that you want to spend all of your time making it, because you have ideas that you want to be able to express and share with the world. But if you also want to be able to afford to live on your art, you can't just create the things you're passionate about or the ideas that you want to express. You also have to create the things that people people will want to see and, more importantly, buy. And more often than not, in an increasingly materialistic and capitalistic world, the latter has to come first, leaving the passion projects that made you want to pursue art in the first place on the back burner, forgotten until you have extra time to work on them. It's a vicious, disheartening, never-ending cycle for most professional artists, and it's one that Diane's story arc throughout Bojack Horseman illustrates beautifully. We pursue art to make the work that we love, but as we gradually make more and more work for others in order to be able to finance making work for us, we spend less and less time making that work for ourselves at all. Diane herself puts it perfectly. When I first moved to LA, I thought I was going to be doing really important work. You know, writing stuff that makes a difference. But then you kind of fall into one thing and then another, and there's always later, right? And she's right, but what if later never comes? Well, we'll get there. In order to analyze and showcase exactly how well Diane's storyline illustrates this constant inner struggle that so many artists face, I'm going to go over her entire journey throughout the course of the show and her career, breaking down just how poignantly so many moments in her life show a story that many of us are all too familiar with. That of an artist with a vision, doomed to never bring it to life by the ever-pressing demands of art's commercialization and commodification. Let's start at the very beginning, long before the show even begins. Diane's childhood. It was bad. Her parents were far from supportive and loving, with Diane describing her father as, quote, a mean, sadistic alcoholic who never supported anything she did and actively delighted in seeing her fail. We don't actually see a lot of him throughout the show, but we do see his equally unsupportive other half, Diane's mother, a cruel, condescending, verbally abusive woman who constantly berates and guilt trips her every chance she gets. But with 4 brothers, at least she wasn't alone in that, right? Wrong. They sucked too. Not only were they all ridiculously lazy, obnoxious, and irresponsible, they actively bullied her with incredibly cruel pranks, one of which they even filmed and proudly admitted to rewatching regularly to this day. Facing bullying at school too, and finding herself unable to make friends, it's safe to say that Diane's childhood was a lonely, isolated, and deeply troubled one. It left her in a position where she was always forced to be the responsible one, the bigger person, the one with no one to rely on but herself. And that's a mentality that would follow her for the rest of her life, for better or for worse. So she wanted to make something better of herself, because her upbringing actively discouraged her to, and she wasn't about to let it. Something her family would be quick to chastise and judge her for when she visits them in adulthood. Diane's childhood and everything she endured throughout it was something that she would eventually cite as one of the reasons she turned to writing. She wanted to make all of that pain and trauma that she survived into something more. She wanted to give it meaning. And I think that's poignant enough to address in and of itself because it's something you see with a lot of artists. So many people experiencing trauma turn to art in varying forms to cope with it, express it, and give meaning to what they're going through. And it's why so many people who had tough childhoods often end up turning to creative careers in adulthood. It's awful that Diane had to experience everything that she did as a child, but she found meaning and healing from it in art, in the form of her writing. And that's something I think a lot of us, myself included, can relate to. Moving on, after finishing high school and finally escaping her toxic household, Diane attended Boston University with a major in literature and equine studies, before eventually relocating to LA at some point in her 20s. She worked as a barista at Starbucks for a while, which, mood, me too, before eventually meeting and dating Mr. Peanut Butter, our favorite impossibly dense yellow lab. I'm not sure if she stopped working there because of that relationship or not, since her career before meeting Bojack isn't super clearly defined, but she obviously does at some point, and proceeds to write what I believe to have been her first book, Secretariat, A Life. This was a nonfiction biography of the horse by the same name, and was the book that got her recommended to Bojack as a potential ghostwriter for his own biography. And that brings us to when the show actually begins. We're introduced to Diane after Bojack's publisher strongly recommends he have her ghostwrite his memoirs, a project that she immediately approaches in a way that shows us as viewers just how authentic and genuine of a person she really is, with artistic integrity and an honest portrayal being her first and utmost priorities. She encourages Bojack to share his real self with her, warts and all, intending from the start to present a realistic, accurate picture of who he is with her writing, something that she never wavers from despite Bojack not always making that easy. Her dedication to creating a real, honest piece of writing and maintaining her artistic integrity at all costs is decidedly and admirably unshakable, something she places even more importance on than her friendship with Bojack. When he reads her first draft and immediately demands that she rewrite it from scratch to paint a more favorable picture of who he is as a person, she vehemently declines, going so far as to leak the first few chapters to media to prove to him that people want to see the real him, not some fake lie of a book designed to make him look good. After he eventually comes around, the book is published and met with massive success, winning a Golden Globe Award for Best Comedy or Musical, inexplicably, despite it being a book. This first introduction to Diane with this beginning stage of her career paints a picture of her that a lot of young artists just starting out resonate with. She's someone who stays true to her beliefs and wants to create work that means something, that's authentic, and that she cares about and is proud of. Yes, she wants it to be successful, and yes, she's doing it for work, but she's passionate enough about making sure it meets her standards and tells a story her way, true to life and free of censorship or deceptively inaccurate flattery, that it's clear that this is something she genuinely does care about. She knows exactly why she became a writer, and she's working on a project that reflects those values. I think a lot of artists have been there, myself included. It's almost like the honeymoon period of a creative career, where you're proud of the work that you're doing and it's exactly like you always dreamed it would be, and it motivates you to keep going, because you're so sure that this is just the first in a long line of successes, that all of the art that you make will be similarly fulfilling, and that all of it will be what you want to make. But that's rarely, if ever, the case, and as the success of her biography skyrockets her career enough to open the door to new opportunities, we see the beginning of the end of that honeymoon period. Following the book's overwhelmingly positive reception, Diane is approached by a self-proclaimed philanthropist, Sebastian St. Clair, who read Bojack's biography and wanted her to write one for him too. More specifically, he wanted, quote, a journalist to follow him around for a few months and document his daring exploits aiding ravaged communities and displaced people. This was right up her alley, as she has always made it very clear that she wants her writing to accomplish something meaningful. As she so eloquently puts it, I want to do something important. I want to help people and do good work and sleep on the ground and poop in a bucket. It's not an easy decision, as it would require her to leave home for months and travel across the world to war-torn third world countries, but it's important to her and she was heavily considering it. But shortly after receiving this offer, Princess Carolyn, Bojack's agent, offers her a job as a character consultant on the film adaptation of Secretariat, as she quite literally wrote the book on him and is more than qualified as an expert. This is the first of many examples to come of Diane facing the impossible decision that all artists inevitably face professionally, the choice between creating what you're passionate about and creating what pays. St. Clair's memoirs are an opportunity for her to use her writing for something meaningful, but working on Secretariat is comparatively much easier and vastly more well-paying, described by Princess Carolyn as the cushiest job in the world, where you sit in a fancy chair and eat pastries all day, and then once a week you say, Secretariat wouldn't do that. Diane initially expresses conflicted resistance to the offer, saying she's already been offered this other thing where she could actually help orphans in Sudan, but Princess Carolyn shuts that down pretty quickly with the pessimistic but admittedly realistic response of, look, if you really want to help people, it doesn't hurt to have little money in your pocket. Take the job now, help the orphans later. And that single statement is, for both Diane and many artists in her position, the beginning of the end. Because the first time you choose to put the art that you care about on the back burner for later, in favor of the work that pays well, you open the door to making that choice again and again and again, until you don't remember the last time you chose creating what you cared about over paying the bills. That line and that choice hit me so hard the first time, because I remember that exact moment in my own career, and how little I knew in that moment that it would lead me down a path I would never be able to escape. It hit even harder the second time I watched it, because I knew that this was that same moment for Diane. After some contemplation, as I'm sure you've gathered, Diane chose to work on Secretariat, telling Sebastian that she would fly out to work on his biography once filming was over. It's a decision that she was conflicted about, asking Bojack if it was weird that she took it, saying, as I quoted earlier, when I first moved to LA, I thought I was going to be doing really important work. You know, writing stuff that makes a difference. But then you kind of fall into one thing and then another. To which Bojack replies, well, you've got time. There's always later, right? To which Diane sadly agrees. Yeah, I guess there's always later. She then goes on to ask if he remembers when he previously asked her if deep down she thought he was a good person, proceeding to explain, that's the thing. I don't think I believe in deep down. I kind of think all you are is just the things you do. And that statement reveals a very significant aspect of Diane's character in terms of her relationship with her work. At her core, she believes that our character as people is defined by the things that we do, and her work is what she does. So if she chooses work that pays over work that she believes in, that defines her as a person. It's not just her fulfillment as an artist at stake, but her identity as a human being as a whole. Bojack reassures her, saying, for what it's worth, I think your writing does make a difference. Although that may well have just made her more conflicted, since if her writing makes a difference, shouldn't she be using it to tell a story that matters? It's a pressure a lot of artists face, because there's a pretty widely accepted belief that the most valuable, important art is art that has meaning or tells a story, and that art that primarily serves the purpose of making money or appealing to the widest audience is less worthwhile or valuable than art that's primarily focused on expressing something meaningful. So we're simultaneously told that our work has to have meaning to be valuable, and that we should prioritize the work that pays and gets attention, while still having to pick one or the other the vast majority of the time. It's a soul-draining cycle that Diane's career exemplifies exceptionally, and this is just the first in a long line of examples of that. She eventually quits her job on Secretariat to go to Cordovia to write the memoirs that she actually believes in, although this isn't necessarily just because she believes in them. Given how conflicted she was about the entire decision, I don't doubt that that's a massive part of it, but the context is relevant. On Secretariat, she was not being consulted for character accuracy, but rather just assigned menial tasks, making the entire job feel completely redundant and not at all what she signed up for. In addition to that, she was facing massive backlash and threats for exposing the predatory past of a beloved celebrity, to the point that Mr. Peanut Butter points out that she might be safer in war-torn Cordovia than her own home. So yes, she chose her passion over easy money, but the extenuating factors that pressured her to do so are worth mentioning. Once in Cordovia, however, she's quickly met with a disappointing truth, that while she had taken the job to make a difference and contribute something meaningful with her writing, that's really not what she was going to be doing there. She befriends and connects with a local child that she believed she would be going there to help, only to have Sebastian warn her against getting too close, saying, "Diane, I'm concerned that you're spending a lot of time with this sickly child. Remember, you're supposed to be writing about me." She replies, "Sure, but isn't this why we're here? To help these people?" To which he argues, "I'm here to help these people. You're here to help me help them by writing a book about me so people back home will give money to my foundation." This is when she first begins to realize exactly how even good causes are inherently rooted in self-serving, hollow, capitalistic, profit-driven motivations, something that's proven undeniably true when a blast ends the life of the child that she'd befriended alongside many others in the middle of the night, and Sebastian replies, "See, Diane, I told you not to make friends." She calls him out for his callousness, saying, "Jesus, you don't care about any of these people. You're just using them as props for your big-shot superhero act." To which he offers a once again pessimistic yet realistic retort. "Diane, the dead will not benefit from our grief, but the survivors need a new hospital, and we need to build it. If you're gonna survive, you need to harden up. I asked you to join me because I thought you could handle it, but if you can't, you can go home." And he's not wrong. Just like when Princess Carolyn told her that the most pragmatic option was to wait to make a difference until she had financial security, Sebastian is telling her that the more pragmatic option is to realize that making a difference sometimes means writing a dramatized, overblown superhero philanthropist story that paints him in the best possible light while neglecting the stories of the people actually affected, because that's what funds his ability to help them. This is the second time Diane's idealistic view of what she wants her writing to accomplish is challenged by the unfortunate yet undeniable limits of realism, and while she tells him she can handle it, she ends up going home anyway. It's something that she feels a significant amount of guilt and shame about, resulting in her lying to her husband and saying she was still in Cordovia for months, while actually just staying on Bojack's couch. And it serves as a titular point in her character arc where she's forced to come to terms with the fact that in order to make it as a writer, she's gonna have to sacrifice her values in one way or another, because the world just isn't as good as she wishes it was. Eventually, Princess Carolyn offers her a job writing celebrity tweets, something she bluntly but not inaccurately pitches to her as, "You're a ghostwriter. It's the same as writing a book. They're just a lot shorter and more people read them." This is the beginning of potentially the saddest but most relatable part of Diane's career. Obviously, she needs work, so she takes it. And while she does eventually get into it and have some vague form of fun with it, it's abundantly clear that she finds absolutely no fulfillment in it, and has only committed to doing it because everything else she's done has left her deeply disillusioned with the world and her career. When Bojack confronts her and says he has no idea what she's doing over there tweeting for celebrities, and says, "When I met you, you were so cool and interesting. You used to actually care about shit. What happened?" That disillusionment is very clear in her response. "I don't know, Bojack. Maybe caring about shit got old. Maybe I'm tired of everyone yelling at me and sending death threats to my house, and all of my friends thinking I'm annoying, and getting in fights with my husband, and seeing little refugee boys die in hospital bombs. It's exhausting and I can't do it. If that makes me a bad person, then I'm sorry that I'm not the cool, interesting girl." Bojack replies that he wasn't calling her a bad person, but that this just isn't her, and she knows it's not her. She gets angry and denies having changed, but it's obvious that the conversation got to her, and really made her question whether or not she'd let this job and her disappointment in the world kill the part of her that cared about her work and the world around her. She made this pretty clear when, directly following that interaction with Bojack, she met up with a friend at a diner, and when she noticed that they were serving water to all guests without them ordering it, something that's illegal in a drought, which they were in, she massively overreacted, yelling at everyone in the restaurant, "Nobody thinks about the world outside themselves." It's an obvious projection of her own feelings of inadequacy and fear that she herself has stopped using her writing to care about others, herself, and the real meaningful topics she once wanted to devote her life to covering, having fallen into the temptingly easy lifestyle of writing low-effort, popular, largely meaningless work that sells instead. This point in her career resonated with me so hard, because my brother in Christ, every artist, even those not pursuing it professionally but instead just posting their work online, has probably been there. I know that if I draw Genshin Impact fan art, it's gonna get 10 times the engagement as a chapter of my webcomic that I actually care about, depicting a fictionalized portrayal of my experience with agoraphobia. I know that a video talking about what bad thing a big art company has done next is gonna get more views than a video talking about why I find Junji Ito's art so compelling and beautiful. Even if I'm sick to death about talking about the former and genuinely found so much fulfillment and joy talking about the latter, I've been exactly where she is, realizing that I've stopped making the work that brings me any kind of artistic, creative, personal fulfillment in favor of the much easier and more profitable work that people are more interested in. I'm still there to some extent. I think all of us always always are to some degree, with that degree varying depending on where we're at in our lives. So this arc hit and will always hit so hard for me, because damn Diane, me too. When the company she's writing tweets for shuts down and she's forced to find other work, she eventually finds herself working for Girl Crush, an online news platform that's basically feminist BuzzFeed. She finds it vaguely more rewarding, but is still held creatively hostage by the need to write content that will get clicks before content she cares about, saying, "I wrote a story about an all-girl refugee kickball league. It didn't get as many clicks as Jillian's story about how in certain pictures you can see the outline of Chris Hemsworth's, But, we're all contributing in our own ways." She still writes the stories she cares about, but it brings her little to no success, with her boss Stefani condescendingly remarking, "Diane, I adored your sad little story on refugees. We have so many articles about things people care about. It's like soup's refreshing to see something that doesn't make you click, but it does make you think." As her work at Girl Crush continues, she's faced with this pressure more and more, eventually asking Todd, her and Bojack's mutual friend, "How do I make people care about important stuff when all they want to do is read articles about who got slayed and who owned at the VMAs?" He helpfully replies, "When I need Mr. Peanut Butter to take his heartworm pills, I always hide it in cheese so he doesn't know he's doing something he hates. What if you take your important stuff and hide it in some juicy gossip?" She's immediately interested, leading Todd to send her on a convoluted quest that's actually just a farce so that she'll have a DNA test run for him, under the guise of it being potential evidence in a scandal about Channing Tatum. And when she runs that test and believes that she's just uncovered proof of that scandal, she's immediately conflicted. Her morals tell her not to sacrifice her journalistic integrity and the well-being of quote-unquote Channing Tatum that is not in fact involved, but she knows that the story would be great for her career. Eventually, her morals win, as they usually do with Diane, and she chooses what she believes to be right over the promise of clicks and popularity, saying to who she thought was Channing Tatum, "I was gonna write a story and drag your name through the mud just because I thought a couple more people would click on an article I wrote, but I don't think that's the kind of journalist I want to be. Maybe I'm not cut out for this line of work. Sorry to bother you." Todd, pretending to be Channing Tatum from the other side of the door, replies, Hey, I obviously don't know you because I'm Channing Tatum, the guy from Green Lantern or whatever, and you are a nobody, but you came all the way over here to warn me about something you hadn't even written yet. You ask me, movie star Channing Tatum, I'd say you're exactly the kind of journalist we need in this world." And you tell him, Todd, you're right. Diane's time working for Girl Crush feels a lot like where I'm at now, personally, as an artist. She does write about what she cares about, but is also forced to tailor it to what people want to read, to at least some degree, facing pressure from all around to get as much engagement as possible first and foremost, with artistic integrity and personal passions being forced into becoming a secondary priority once again. There's also the constant temptation to throw people under the bus and lower yourself to covering controversy for controversy's sake for easy clicks. I feel the same with my videos. For the most part, I talk about what I care about, but I also have to carefully tailor my presentation of it to appeal to the widest range of viewers. And controversial topics absolutely do better. It's not limited to content creation either. Artists everywhere, as we've discussed already, are constantly in this position, where even when they're making what they want to some degree, they still have to prioritize work that'll be at least relatively well received, and carefully present it to appeal to as many people as possible. Anyway, it's around this point that Bojack, while making a show called Filbert, briefly garners attention and support as a feminist, completely accidentally and as a result of zero actual feminism. When Filbert's script then faces scrutiny for being sexist, Bojack asks Diane for advice on how to save his fake feminist reputation, at which point she reads the script and replies that it is, in fact, sexist, saying, "Everything Vance said about these scripts is true. It's posing as a deconstruction of the edifice of toxic masculinity, but it's just using that as an excuse to relish in its own excesses. And the most depressing thing is that 10 times more people are gonna watch this show than read anything I've ever written." This once again is a striking example of how the most real, authentic, powerful art out there will get a fraction of the amount of approval and attention as art that's controversial or popular. And Bojack himself eventually acknowledges this, saying, "You were right. It's all the things you said it is, but it doesn't have to be. Come on as a consulting producer. Work with Flip on these scripts. Make the show something that we can all be proud of. You said it yourself. More people are going to watch this show than read anything you write. I'm giving you the opportunity to change society for the better." This is another opportunity for Diane to do the one thing she always wanted to with her writing. Make a difference. Make something meaningful. She eventually agrees, and despite initial resistance from the existing scriptwriter, she gives the project her all and succeeds in turning Filbert into a meaningful, emotionally significant character. Unfortunately, as is the case for many artists, her work is misconstrued. She was trying to write a character that's sympathetic and human, or as human as a horse can be, while still making it clear that he's a bad person who does bad things that aren't okay. Bojack, at the premiere, expresses that he took Filbert's character to mean that it's okay to be a bad person because everyone is. The opposite of the message that Diane wanted to convey. She's incredibly upset about this, fighting with Bojack and telling her co-writer, "When I first started this job, I wanted to make Filbert more well-rounded so the audience audience could relate to him better. I made him more vulnerable, and that made him more likable, which makes for a better TV show. But if Filbert is just a way to help dumb assholes rationalize their own awful behavior, well, I'm sorry, but we can't put this out there. This part of Diane's career speaks to the unfortunate fact that even when you create what you want, what you feel has meaning, putting it out there can often lead to those viewing it doing so in bad faith, completely missing the point, or attributing meaning all of their own to something meant entirely differently, which can be both scary and deeply demoralizing. Later on, Diane's girl crush boss, Stefani, asks her what she's been up to. Right as Diane was about to tell her about the book of essays she's working on, something she actually cares about, Stefani shuts her down, says she doesn't care, and instead asks her to be the face of Girl Crush's new video content. After her initial hesitation, Diane eventually accepts, traveling the world and exposing, quote, the ugly underbelly of American capitalism, something that she ends up actually finding very rewarding and fulfilling, expressing pleasure that her work is finally making a difference. Even so, she still faces pressure to make more feel-good content than real hard-hitting stories, because as Stefani would say, people just get too bummed out by the truth. She eventually quits Girl Crush after moving in with her then cameraman, now boyfriend, Guy, who encouraged her to leave LA and the pressures of work that she didn't enjoy and finally focus on the writing that she herself truly wanted to do all along. After a call with Princess Carolyn, she unintentionally pitched her idea, quote, half essay, half memoir. The working title is One Last Thing and Then I Swear to God I'll Shut Up About This Forever, a definitive retrospective of the choices we make, people we hurt, the places we go, part 1, which, to her surprise, Princess Carolyn immediately sold, telling her she had an advance and 6 months to get it done. But that's an immense amount of pressure, because this was it. This was what she'd spent her entire career waiting for, the opportunity to turn all of the pain and trauma that she'd experienced throughout her life into something meaningful with her writing, to connect with others who had been through the same, to finally write for herself. It's the opportunity every artist dreams of. But with that pressure came a lot of anxiety, and while she was outwardly happy, expressing to Guy, her boyfriend, once I got started, it was easy. So much of my career has been writing for and about other people and how terrible everything is. It's actually really refreshing to just focus on myself, you know? It's made clear that things aren't nearly as easy as she'd hoped when the camera pans to her laptop, revealing that all she'd written was a long line of, I am terrible. Now, this next part of her character arc is actually one that I'm going to go into more in its own video discussing how Diane's story represents the common belief that to make meaningful art, you have to suffer. The tragic artist who can only make truly good work in the throes of depression and pain, because pain prompts the most powerful meaning to be expressed. During this time, she struggles with depression, feelings of needing to go to a dark place to write anything good, and being subsequently unable to even get started on the book beyond the vague concepts that she wants to express. After going to the mall to work on her book, she gets distracted and ends up writing mindlessly on a tangent about a teenage girl mall detective named Ivy Tran, which turns into an actual chapter of a potential book. She shows it to Guy, who thinks it's actually good and fun, but Diane expresses that she doesn't want to write some young adult book series that's fun. She wants to write what matters to her, to bare her soul and create something with meaning. And as she continues to spiral physically and mentally as she tries to do so, Guy, out of pure concern for her well-being, sends Princess Carolyn the Ivy Tran pages without Diane's knowledge or consent. Princess Carolyn then calls her, saying, loved it. I love the protagonist, I love the world, I love that it wasn't your sad memoir about your boring life. Immediately devaluing the work that Diane actually wanted to make because this was franchise material. Diane is deeply, deeply conflicted about this and continues to be right up to the end of the series. She argues that she's not writing a book to have fun, and if she doesn't write her book of essays now, she never will, finally realizing that if she keeps saying she can do it later, later will never come. Princess Carolyn tells her that maybe she shouldn't write them then, to which Diane responds, I have to, because if I don't, that means all the damage I got isn't good damage, it's just damage. I've gotten nothing out of it, and all those years I was miserable was for nothing. I could have been happy this whole time and written books about girl detectives and been cheerful and popular and had good parents. Is that what you're saying? What was it all for? Princess Carolyn argues, I don't know, Diane. All I know is that this book about the girl detective is fun. I liked it. I like thinking that my daughter could grow up in a world with books like that. Diane, still very conflicted, explains, when I was a little girl, I thought that everything, all the abuse and neglect, it somehow made me special. And I decided that one day I would write something that would make little girls like me feel less alone. And if I can't write that book, then, and Princess Carolyn, genuinely comfortingly, answers, then maybe write this other book. Maybe this book does that too. Now, through this exchange, it's made abundantly clear that this isn't just a simple conflict between a book that'll sell and a book that she wants to write. It's so much more than that. It's her conflict in processing her trauma and finding meaning in her work and her life, and realizing that she might not be in a place right now where writing her essays is the way to make that happen. But we'll go over that more in in the other video I mentioned. What's relevant to my point here is that while it is more complex than just choosing between the popular option and the meaningful option, that is still at the crux of this issue. Princess Carolyn made it abundantly clear that despite the fact that Diane doesn't really want to write a young adult detective series, it would be vastly more successful than the thing she does want to write. So she should do it anyway and just try to give it as much meaning as she can, even if that's not nearly as much. Obviously, Diane has her own reasons beyond that for postponing the essays and writing Ivy Tran instead, but there's no denying that the pressure to provide a product that will be successful and profitable was a significant motivator in her decision. And that's the tragic part of this video. That's the end. She wrote Ivy Tran as a series, she was very successful in doing so, and the essays that she always wanted to write, became a writer to write, never got written. In the final episode, when Bojack asks her how she's been, it's clear that she's not really happy or fulfilled, just okay. Instead of taking a break from the series to write something she was passionate about, Princess Carolyn pressured her into writing a sequel to the first Ivy Tran. She eventually found some kind of fulfillment and a reason to want to do so when her boyfriend's son, a gruff kid who was very slow to warm up to her, expressed that he actually read and enjoyed Ivy Tran, naming specific moments that really resonated with him, saying, parts of it felt real, you know? Validating her desire to finally create work that would mean something to someone. And that is something. I think for her that was enough to keep writing it, because even if it didn't have meaning to her, she had succeeded in creating something that had meaning to others. And that's a bittersweet place to end because it's realistic. Maybe someday Diane would end up writing those essays, but it's more than likely that she wouldn't, because the harsh reality of life is that artists in the professional world are always going to be forced to prioritize their success over their fulfillment. Diane's story is one that a lot of us as artists might see ourselves in, the constant, never-ending choice between money and meaning, and the endless cycle of looking at the art we really want to make and thinking, well, there's always later. Her journey throughout her career reflects the choices, sacrifices, and compromises that so many artists must face to balance their passion with the demands of the market, and in that way, Bojack Horseman has masterfully succeeded in capturing one of the deepest struggles an artist can endure. It's no surprise that her story resonates with artists and creators alike, because this show isn't just a compelling, authentic, brilliant depiction of the good, the bad, and the ugly of life, but also a profound commentary on the human condition in the context of the art world. I hope you enjoyed this ridiculously unnecessarily long first entry in the Artful Analysis series, and I hope you'll join me in similar videos in the future. Comments and likes go a long way in helping me decide what new series to prioritize, so if you like this kind of content, please let me know so that I can make more of it. Thank you for watching, and special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak42, King Good James, and Haruki Kenway, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Elenk Shi, Kim Nguyen, Shamil Sheep, Crazy Asar, Gen Tong, Grace Nick Xavier, MG, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Grim Spectre, Ash W, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Uluru, Greg Noble, Decagon, Milshio, Jenny Tan, and Captain Retku for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.